Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Whether it's career considerations, long-term care planning, or budgeting needs, the majority of investors agree that men and women have different financial considerations, according to a survey by Hartford Funds. Joining me to discuss is Julie Genjac, Managing Director of Applied Insights at Hartford Funds. Julie, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. I'm delighted to be here today.
Give us a high-level overview of the survey.
Absolutely. So we were looking to explore investors' preferences for receiving financial advice and specifically marketing materials. But what we really wanted to understand was what were investors' attitudes around gendered content, which I think is always an interesting discussion in the advisor community. We ultimately surveyed just over 900 consumers, 904 to be precise, whose household income or total investable assets were more than 75,000. And Jill, the key takeaway from this survey was that more than half of investors, about 52%, agree that men and women have different financial needs. But what was interesting is only a quarter of respondents wanted to work with a financial professional who tailored their advice specifically to gender.
How do men and women prefer to be marketed to?
So what was interesting, and the results that we found showed us that the top areas where respondents feel men and women have different financial needs include, first and foremost, career considerations, which probably isn't a surprise. About 60% of respondents felt that way. Secondarily, at 56%, long-term care planning, which I think, given the longevity statistics, makes sense. And then the third in line was budgeting. About 55% of respondents felt that that was an interesting consideration between the genders. But I think ultimately, despite those differences, 46%, so nearly half of our survey respondents, say that men and women should receive the same educational material on financial topics in general.
Julie, when marketing to the next generation, how important is lifestyle-oriented materials and ESG considerations?
So, Jill, that's interesting, and I know that that's a debate that we come across very often in our industry. But first and foremost, across all of the generations, investors most valued marketing materials that were easy to understand above all else, which I don't think comes as a surprise. But ultimately, the secondary, consideration really was individualization. Over a third of respondents said, talk to me about my individual plan, my situation, what my goals are, and then ultimately really showcasing how that sound investment advice and that decision-making process can help me achieve my goals. But I think what is interesting specifically to the ESG considerations is that understanding lifestyle goals is much more critical when marketing to millennials and Gen Z. In addition, materials that communicate a product's ESG considerations are also much more important to the younger generations. 32% of millennials and Gen Z said that was key to them when speaking to them from a marketing perspective.
And to wrap up here, when considering product-related offerings, what do both generations primarily value?
So at the end of the day, all generations really want materials that highlight a long-term perspective, long-term growth, followed by materials that talk about the investment goals, the goal-setting process, and then ultimately materials that track performance against a well-known benchmark. I think those are the three most valued aspects of any marketing plan that can be delivered to consumers.
All right, Julie, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.